I wanted to start out by asking you, how many of you guys have ever had your favorite TV show canceled before? It's a gut-wrenching feeling to have that happen to you. Or maybe it was your favorite restaurant that shut down, your favorite drink or snack that got discontinued. It's never fun when something gets canceled. And I remember when I was like a wee little boy, the first time this ever happened to me, I loved this show called Teen Titans, okay? Now, some of you guys probably only know Teen Titans from like the kids' Teen Titans Go show, but if you've never watched the actual Teen Titans show, it is incredible. And I remember watching that growing up, loving that show, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, at the end of one season, they just never renewed it, and they just canceled it, and it was just like a gut-wrenching feeling. And then it happened again a year later. I watched this show on the Cartoon Network called Tower Prep, and it was just like this random show, but I loved it. It was this show about these kids who like went to this like prep school, but it all is not what it seems, and there's like a Cyclops running around, and they all have superpowers. I loved it, and then all of a sudden, it got canceled out of nowhere. And then just most recently, one of my favorite shows, Kim's Convenience. Mid-season, I know, just goodbye. It's not a fun feeling at all. Canceling shows, canceling your favorite things is never fun. But nowadays, we're not really concerned with TV shows getting canceled. We're more so concerned with us getting canceled, right? I mean, we live in cancel culture all the time. It seems like every single week we're hearing another story about some celebrity who said something racist and now they're canceled, or they got let go of a project that they were working on, or they got fired as CEO of their company. It seems like every single week someone's getting canceled. Okay, maybe your favorite celebrity, you just found out they're like racist or something, or like a tweet that they tweeted years ago came back, and it's not fun. And I'm not here to talk about whether I think cancel culture is a good thing or a bad thing. I don't want to open that can of worms, because for real, sometimes people get canceled for really good reasons, but other times I feel like sometimes we just like to rally the village and get our pitchforks and torches out and just go like burn someone's house down because they said something that we didn't like. So I'm not going to talk about if I agree with cancel culture or not, but I do want to point out something interesting, is that I think sometimes it's interesting to see what things are worthy of being canceled and what things aren't. What things our culture says is unforgivable and what things they kind of let slide by. Because our culture is very vocal about what they think is unforgivable, what they think deserves to be canceled. Culture thinks that it's got it figured out, right? Culture thinks it has all of the answers. And it may seem like they do until you kind of look at the world around us and you kind of start to see that actually culture is heading in a wrong direction. Things are not going well in the world around us. It's not hard to see that, right? You just look around the world, mental health is at an all-time low, right? Depression, anxiety, it's at an all-time high. We look around, we see war, we see poverty. The world thinks it's got it figured out, but clearly it doesn't. And as Christ followers, if you consider yourself to be a follower of Jesus, you may be questioning, like, what things in this world should I be pursuing? What things should I accept? And what things should I cancel? And so what we're going to do over the next couple of weeks is we're going to look at some of the things that our world accepts that we as Christ followers should cancel. And some things that our culture cancels that actually we as Christ followers should actually accept into our lives and pursue because it's good. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at that first one. Things that our culture accepts and pursues and chases after. That is, if you consider yourself to be a Christ follower, someone who follows after God, we got to cancel those things from our lives. And to do that, I want to look at a guy in the Bible by the name of King Saul. Maybe you've heard of King Saul before. Saul was the first king of Israel. Okay, he lived an extraordinary life. And Saul was somebody who started off really well. I mean, he had everything you would want in life. He was good looking, he was powerful, he was successful, he had a lot of popularity, he had everything that our world looks at as success. But at the end of his life, he's alone, weak, vulnerable, and he actually ends up taking his own life. And I think it's interesting to look at that because I think it shows us that when we follow after God, it doesn't matter how we start, it matters how we finish, right? And so maybe you're here and you're looking around this room and you look at all the people here and you think, I don't fit in here, right? I didn't grow up in church. I don't know the lyrics of the songs we're singing. I'm not used to this. I've done some bad stuff. I'm not a church person. I'm nowhere near as good as these people. But the sad reality is that for many of us in this room who did grow up in the church, we started off well, we're not going to end well. For many of us, we start down this path where we start to accept things into our lives that culture tells us is important, and we allow that to become so important in our lives. And just like King Saul, one step at a time, we find ourselves in a place we never expected to be. And so it doesn't matter how you started, it matters how you end. And so today you can make a choice to pursue after God this moment. So what we see with King Saul is that his life kind of spiraled out of control. Even though he started well, it spiraled out of control because he embraced things that culture told him to embrace, that as follower of God, we should cancel out of our lives. Like this first one, if you're taking notes, write this down. As Christ followers, we are called to cancel the lie of self-reliance. The lie of self-reliance. So Saul became king at a time of peace and prosperity. Things were good. But pretty soon after that, Israel ended up in a lot of battles and wars against this group of people called the Philistines. Okay, now if you've ever heard the story of David and Goliath, Goliath was a Philistine. Okay, so there are these people who are constantly at odds with Israel. And Saul is anointed as king, and his job is to overthrow these Philistines. Okay, his job is to lead his nation, the Israelites, into battle, and most importantly, to lead them closer to God. And so there's this prophet, his name is Samuel. And Samuel kind of speaks on God's behalf. And he comes to Saul and he says, okay, you're about to go into this battle against the Philistines at this place called Gilgal. Okay, but before you go into battle, I want you to wait for me, because we're going to offer a sacrifice to the Lord, and we're going to worship and praise him, and he's going to bless us as we go into this battle. Saul says, okay, cool, that's fine. So he brings his men to Gilgal, and he's waiting for Samuel to show up. And Samuel says, wait 7 days. And so Saul starts waiting. And he waits, and he waits, and he waits. And he's starting to grow impatient. He's starting to think, when is this? Why are we waiting? Why can't we just offer the sacrifice now? Why is Samuel taking so long to get here? And he's waiting, and he's waiting, and he's growing more and more impatient. And he's looking at his men who are about to go into battle, and they all start getting scared. And they start allowing fear into their lives, and they're starting to scatter around. And Saul's getting a little nervous, like, man, we just need to get out there and fight the battle. We need to do this now. And this is what happens in 1 Samuel chapter 13. It says, Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops were with him, quaking in fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal. And Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings. And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he was finishing, Samuel arrives, of course. And Saul went out to greet him, but Samuel's not very happy. What have you done? Asked Samuel. Saul replied, well, when I saw that the men were scattering and that you didn't come on time, and the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines have come against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor, so I offered up the burnt offering. Samuel says, you've done a foolish thing. You've not kept the command that your Lord God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all of time, but now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read that, I get a little frustrated, because I'm thinking Samuel's like that one guy, like, actually, you were supposed to wait for me for 7.5 days. I'm like, come on, Samuel, you were late. Why are you giving Saul such a hard time? I can relate to Saul in this moment. I can relate to him, man. He's trying to follow God. He's listening to these commands, but he's growing impatient. Samuel's late in arriving. His men are kind of cowering around, and Saul's thinking, man, I need to step up. I need to get this, okay? But what we have to realize here is that's not really what's going on. Saul here had a direct command from God. Wait for Samuel to arrive, offer the burnt offering. And I can imagine Saul in his mind the days leading up to it. Man, why are we waiting this long? It's like, okay, I'll wait, but not a second longer. So days 5, he's still not here. Day 6, still not here. Day 7, probably at the crack of dawn, he's like, he's not here. I just got to take over. I got to do this myself. And it's this lie of self-reliance that it's all up to me, that God's not going to come through and I need to do this on my own. And we do this all the time. Culture tells us that your future is in your own hands. It's all up to you. You got to hustle. You got to work hard. You got to create your own destiny. It's all on you. No one else is coming through for you. God is not in your corner. You just have to do it on your own. You don't need anybody else. But the Bible teaches us something very different. The Bible teaches us actually that we're not enough, that we cannot do it on our own, that we're actually in our own sin, very wicked, depraved, we're far from God. We cannot do anything on our own. And the lie of self-reliance is that we can control our own life, that I can just pave my own path. I don't need God. I only need me. I'm independent. I'm self-reliant. I don't need anybody. But you see, following Jesus is about giving up control. Following Jesus is about surrendering control to God. Because the reality is, you can't control your life. As much as culture wants to tell you that you can, you can't. You have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. You have no idea what's going to happen a year from now. And that's what the author of the book of James writes in the Bible when he says, now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we'll go to this city or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why, you don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this and do that. And so Saul, instead of trusting in God's promise that he gave him, took matters into his own hands, said, I got to come through on my own, and controlled his life. It's all about self-reliance. In what ways are you like Saul in your life? In what ways are you clinging onto control for your future, maybe? Like you know that God's got a path for you, but you say, you know what, actually, God, I got a better path, and it's my own path. Maybe it's with your possessions. Maybe it's with your fears. You're not sure that God's coming through for you, so you got to do everything yourself. Another way that we can fall into the same trap as Saul that we should avoid is this on your outline. As Christ followers, we are called to cancel the trap of overindulgence. The trap of overindulgence. Saul continued to spiral out of control, go farther away from God. There's this one moment where Saul is in a different battle with a group of people called the Amalekites. And God had told Saul, the Amalekites are evil, they're wicked, and I'm going to use Israel to judge them. I want you to completely destroy them, completely wipe them out. Don't leave anything left. Okay? Destroy all of their livestock, all of anything that they own, all their material possessions, destroy it. I don't want anything left of them. And so Saul goes out and he overthrows the Amalekites, and yet he actually leaves their king alive to kind of flaunt around as a trophy. Look what I did. And he also leaves their livestock, the best of their cows and sheep, and he leaves a lot of their goods. Because he looks at those things, despite the fact that God had given him a command to destroy them, he looks at those things and he says, well, it's good, it looks good, why not keep it? And this is the trap of overindulgence, where we believe the lie that if something looks good and it feels good and, you know, it tastes good or smells good or whatever, it must be good, right? And I can never get enough of it. It makes me feel good, so why not get more of it? It's the same lie that our culture believes. If it feels good, it should be good. And so our culture promotes this like unrestrained indulgence. And you know what? It's all in the name of freedom. It's all in the name of freedom. I should be able to do whatever I want to do. Who are you to tell me what I can and can't do with my life? Especially God. How dare God limit my freedom? How dare God say, don't have sex before marriage? How dare God say, don't get drunk or don't, do drugs, party, or whatever we think God says? I should be free. It's my life. I can do whatever I want. And that sounds nice until you realize that this whole idea of I should be able to do what I want, it doesn't actually lead to freedom. It leads to slavery. It leads to addiction. Because let me tell you something. If you've ever been addicted to something, if you've ever been trapped in a sin habit that you know you shouldn't be doing but you can't break free from, you don't feel like you have freedom. You don't feel like you have control over your own life. You feel like you're a slave to a substance, a slave to a computer screen, a slave to whatever sin is holding you down. But we say, oh, but I can do whatever I want. It doesn't feel like that in that moment, does it? And God says, actually, if you follow me and live within the boundaries that I've set, despite the fact that you may think it feels good, it actually leads to freedom. It actually leads to you overcoming these sin things that actually just hold us down. And yet for Saul, he just said, it looks good. I want it. I'm going to add to my life. Can never get too much livestock. Can never get too many material possessions. I just need more and more and more. And so God sets boundaries in our life, not because he hates us, not because he wants to ruin our fun, but because he cares about us. And his way actually does lead to the most abundant life ever. So what things in your life are you overindulging in? What things in your life do you do that you know are not God honoring, but you do it anyway, just because it feels good? And if it feels good, it should be good, right? The last way that Saul allowed culture to make him go through this downfall is that he didn't cancel the cycle of comparison. The cycle of comparison. Saul was, I'll just read to you the verse. The first time that Saul is ever introduced in the Bible, it says this. It says, Kish had a son named Saul, as handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else. If I was ever in the Bible, that's how I would want to be introduced. Come on. Most handsome man in all of the land. And he was taller than everyone else, by the way. The sad thing is, that's about as good of the qualities that Saul had. And he allowed these superficial things to define himself. See, Saul allowed his popularity to define himself. And this is exactly what our culture does. Social media is designed to get you to compare. It's designed to get you to live for likes and to compare your popularity to the people around you. And you know what? When you're on top and you're the best, in the room, that feels great, right? Until you're not. Until somebody comes along that's better than you. And then suddenly you begin to compare. You begin to build insecurities in your life. You begin to feel awful about yourself. I remember in my life, this showed up when I was 17 years old. Now, growing up, I'd known since I was your guys' age in youth group that I wanted to be a youth pastor because of the impact my youth pastor made on my life. And so I knew I was kind of following this path. And then when I was 17 years old, I graduated high school, and my church decided to hire me on as a youth intern. Come on, somebody. I was so pumped. And for me, that was a big deal. I'm I'm a youth intern, let's go. And I was so pumped about it because I'm 17, I'm first year Bible college, nobody else my age, nobody else in the first years had a job at a church. And so I walked around with a swagger, I'm a youth intern, come on. And I held that title so proudly until I met Adam. Now, Adam was a year older than me, and he was sharing his testimony one day, and he shared about how he was actually a youth pastor at the age of 18, a youth pastor. And suddenly, in an instant, that youth intern title, I hated it. Because I'm thinking, man, I'm not a youth pastor. I'm just a stinky little youth intern. I'm no good for anything. I loved that title until I realized someone else had something higher. And that's what comparison does. Oftentimes, we're so content where we are until we compare it to what someone else has. I guarantee you, you would be totally content with your clothes if you didn't compare it to your friend's clothes. You'd be totally content with your house if you didn't compare it to your friend's house. You'd be content with your popularity, with your looks. You'd be content with anything in your life until you compare it to somebody else. You know this is true. Somebody once said the best way to ruin something good is to compare it to something else. And this is what Saul does. You may know the story of David and Goliath. Saul was king at the time, and they were facing off against these Philistines. They had one guy, Goliath, who was this massive giant. And David goes out to fight against Goliath because all of Saul's men were too afraid. They couldn't overcome him. So Saul allows David to go out, and David overthrows Goliath. And news spread about this incredible victory all the way back to Jerusalem. And on their way back, it says this in 1 Samuel chapter 18. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out of all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul, singing and dancing with joyful songs and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They've credited David with tens of thousands, but with me only thousands. What more can David get but my kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. See, for Saul, this comparison between him and David, it drove him mad. From that moment on, he became paranoid, bitter, and suspicious of David. He wanted to kill David. Multiple times he tried to kill David. And I don't know about you, but paranoid, bitter, jealous, those all sound like things that I have in my life when I compare my life to somebody else who has slightly better than me. Comparison kills, and it leads us in this cycle of I need to achieve more, and then once I get a little bit more, I compare again. How do I stack up now? Am I better? Am I worse? Oh, I'm still worse. I need to do better. And it's a cycle. You compare, you strive for more, and then you're dissatisfied or discouraged, and so you strive again. It's a cycle, and it leads us to destruction. It leads us to building insecurities, to having body image issues, to having low self-esteem, to feeling worthless about ourselves, to feeling like I'll never be as successful as that person. And it leads us far away from God. The trap of comparison is that you could be fully satisfied in life until you compare it to somebody else. And our culture is fueled off of comparison. In what ways are you comparing your life to others? In what ways are you allowing comparison, jealousy, envy to drag you down in life? What would it look like for you to overcome that, to say, I have content in all that God has given me? Saul fell into the same traps that our culture falls into, and it's the same traps that we could fall into as well. The lie of self-reliance, the cycle of comparison, the trap of overindulgence. All of these things lead us away from God. There are things that our culture praises. There are things that our culture accepts and loves and lifts on a pedestal. But there are things that if you consider yourself to be a Christ follower, you got to cancel that out of your life. It's only going to draw you closer or farther away from God. What would it look like for you to break free from that today? What would it look like for you to look in the face of self-reliance and say, you know what, I can't do it on my own. I'm not good enough. What would it look like for you to look at the face of overindulgence in a culture that says you just need a little bit more, just one more hit, and say, you know what, I have all that I need in God, and I want to live my life to honor Him. What would it look like for you to look in the face of comparison and say, I want to live for an audience of one, and I'm not going to compare my life to others? How radically different would this world be? How radically different would your life be? Don't believe the lies that our culture tells us you should embrace. they're just going to lead you away from God. They're going to lead you to be like Saul. I mean, look at our world. Does our world seem satisfied? Does our world seem happy? Does our world seem like they've got it all together? Or is it a world that's hurting, that feels broken, that's looking for an answer in things that were never designed to be the answer? As we close, I want to bring you back to the beginning where I was talking about how Saul started off well, but he didn't end well. And maybe you're here and you say, that's not really my story. I didn't start well. Nathan, I got it past. I've messed up. I've gone down roads that I'm not proud of. The beauty of Saul's story is that the opposite of his life is also true. That even if you've started far away from God, even if you didn't have it all together, God can bring you up out of that. Jesus died on the cross to forgive you of your past. And you have an opportunity to accept that and to take one step closer to him today. And I want to give you that opportunity as we close.